If you enjoy these kinds of horror stories, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. My name is Raymond Holt. I am 48 years old, and for more than 20 years I have worked the kind of jobs that begin after sunset. Construction sites, empty schools, closed shopping malls, even an airport hangar in the middle of winter. I know the silence of buildings at night, and I know the tricks that silence plays. Doors breathe, pipes click, animals scratch. These are things I have lived with so long they feel almost ordinary. That was before this place, before the museum. The advertisement caught my attention in a small local newspaper. It offered good pay, steady hours, and benefits that most jobs like mine never gave. The requirements were simple: night watch, calm under pressure, follow instructions. Nothing about the history of the place, nothing about what it stored. I drove down on a Tuesday afternoon and found the building almost by accident. The museum sat between two government offices, its stone walls darkened with age, its windows tall and blind with dust. No banners, no posters, no signs of current exhibitions. If you did not know better, you might think the building had been shut down years ago. I parked at the curb, shut the engine, and sat for a moment. A breeze carried the smell of damp leaves. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that swallows the sound of your own breath. The heavy oak doors looked too large for any visitor. Still, there was a faint brass plate near the handle, green with tarnish. It read only, "Museum of Natural Antiquities." I placed both hands against the oak doors, their surface cold and rough under my palms. For a moment, they resisted, as if the weight of years held them shut. My shoulders tightened as I leaned in, feeling the wood give slowly, inch by inch. The hinges let out a deep groan that rolled through the empty street, a sound like something dragged from a long dream. The vibration ran up my arms, and I felt an unease stir in my stomach, the sense that the building itself knew I was crossing its threshold. When the gap finally opened wide enough, stale air spilled out, heavy with dust and the faint bite of iron, and I stepped inside. The lobby was dim. A single chandelier hung high above, its bulbs yellow and weak. Dust floated through the air, turning in the light. The floor was black and white marble, cracked in places, polished in others. There was no ticket counter, no maps, no pamphlets. Instead, a wooden desk stood near the wall, and behind it a woman with hair pulled tight into a bun, her face thin and pale under the chandelier's weak light. Dark shadows circled her eyes, and her expression carried the exhaustion of someone who had repeated the same task for years. She wore a plain gray dress, sleeves buttoned at the wrists, and a silver watch that ticked audibly in the quiet room. Her movements were precise, almost mechanical. She looked up when I entered, her gaze sharp but empty, nodded once without a word of welcome, and slid a folder across the desk toward me. "Sign these," she said. Her voice was flat, rehearsed. "Standard contract. Do not leave any section blank." I opened the folder. The pages were thick, yellowed at the edges, covered in rules and liability clauses written in cramped print. The words blurred together as I flipped through, yet each signature line waited like a trap. My pen scratched across them, my name repeated until it felt less like mine. The woman watched in silence, her thin fingers tapping the desk with a rhythm that never faltered, her eyes unblinking as if she measured not my answers but my pulse. She did not explain what I was agreeing to. She did not ask about my past experience. Once my hand left the page, she snatched the folder back, stamped the top with a red mark that spread like blood through the fibers, and after a pause that lasted just a moment too long, she handed me a plain black badge on a lanyard, her fingers cold when they brushed mine. "Security," she said. "You start tonight." That was all. I was led down a long corridor. My guide was a man in his 50s, tall, with a narrow frame and a voice that carried no warmth. He introduced himself only as Mr. Ellis. He walked quickly, his shoes striking the floor with sharp, deliberate steps. As we moved through the hall, the exhibits came into view: tall glass cases, wooden frames, and iron locks. Inside were bones, preserved skins, tools carved from dark stone, jars filled with liquid that caught the light. "This is not a public museum in the usual sense," Ellis said. "We have visitors, yes, but the purpose is containment. Do not forget that word, containment." I nodded, though I was not sure what he meant. The word containment echoed in my mind like a locked door I wasn't allowed to open. Was it just a way to say preservation, or did it mean something far less comforting? My eyes lingered on a skull larger than a horse's, its jaw lined with double rows of teeth. The glass reflected my face, pale and uncertain, and I wondered if Ellis's tone suggested that what rested behind the glass was not simply displayed, but was being held back. We passed more rooms. One was filled with mannequins dressed in ceremonial robes, their wooden faces painted with strange expressions. Another displayed maps drawn on stretched hides, symbols spiraling across the surface. The air smelled of dust, paper, and something metallic. Every time I glanced too long, Ellis urged me forward, his stride never slowing. The security office was smaller than I expected. A desk, 2 chairs, a bank of monitors showing grainy feeds from different halls. A corkboard on the wall held schedules and notes. Most important was a sheet of paper taped above the desk. Its edges were curled, the ink slightly faded. A title in heavy black letters read, "Rules of Night Watch." I leaned closer, but Ellis stopped me with a raised hand. "Later. For now, you only need to know the building closes at 10. Doors are locked until 6. You will patrol every 90 minutes. Stay on the lit paths. Do not attempt shortcuts. Do not open cases or doors that are marked with colored tags." His voice was steady, but there was weight behind each sentence. I wanted to ask questions. Why colored tags? What was in the cases? What happened if I broke the routine? But the look on his face warned me against it. I had worked enough jobs to recognize that look. Some answers were not meant for new employees. At 9:30, I took a seat at the desk. The museum above was still open, faint noises drifting down, footsteps, hushed voices, the echo of children. I tried to distract myself by watching the monitors. Most of the screens showed quiet halls, but one flickered often, as if something was brushing past the camera. I tapped the screen, adjusted the knob, but the static did not clear. At 9:50, the last group filed out, escorted by staff. Their footsteps faded, and the sound of the lock echoed through the lobby like a judge's gavel. At 10 sharp, the heavy doors sealed. Silence followed, deep and complete. It felt like the building itself had taken a breath and was holding it. I stood, adjusted the badge at my chest, and checked the flashlight. The beam cut through the dimness, white against the stone walls. The first patrol was about to begin. I glanced once more at the paper on the wall. The rules waited. Their letters seemed darker than before, as if the ink had deepened. But Ellis had said not yet. So I turned away, left the office, and stepped into the corridor. The museum at night was different from the afternoon tour. The air felt colder. My footsteps echoed too loudly. Shadows stretched long across the floor, bending in angles that did not match the lamps above. I walked past a row of glass cases. Inside one, an arrangement of masks stared back, their surfaces cracked with age yet shining faintly in the dim light. The painted eyes were wide and unblinking, each one fixed in a different direction, as if they watched not only me but every corner of the hall at once. Some were bright with colors that hadn't faded despite the years, others dark and smeared as though stained by use. My throat tightened as I stood before them. I told myself they were wood and paint, nothing more. Costumes from some forgotten culture, pieces meant for display. Still, the longer I looked, the more I felt that their gazes pressed against me, measuring my presence. The urge to turn my eyes away became so strong it felt almost physical, like heat against my skin, and I forced myself to move on before the stare of carved faces could root me to the spot. At the next hall, I paused. A taxidermied creature stood on display, tall as a man, covered in scales, its jaws open in a permanent snarl. Its glassy eyes reflected my flashlight in a way that made them seem alive, catching the beam and throwing it back with a dull glimmer. The skin, though preserved, looked stretched too tight across its frame, as if it might split at any moment. My stomach tightened, my chest heavy with the instinct to step back. The plaque at its base had no writing, only a number carved into metal, 314. I checked the list in my pocket with a hand that shook more than I wanted to admit. Item 314, specimen, secure, nothing else. The emptiness of that description unsettled me more than any detailed warning could have, and I wondered if the word secure meant the creature was being kept safe from us, or if we were being kept safe from it. The silence pressed in. I moved on. When I returned to the office, the clock showed 11. My shift had hours to go. Ellis was gone. The monitors flickered, static lining the edges of the screens. On one feed, I thought I saw movement, a shadow passing behind the glass of an empty gallery. But when I leaned closer, it was gone. I leaned back in the chair, trying to settle myself. The leather creaked, loud in the stillness. I drummed my fingers against the desk, listening to the faint hum of electricity. Somewhere in the distance, a vent rattled as air pushed through. Then silence again. My ears strained for sound, any sound, but the quiet pressed harder. The kind of quiet that makes you wonder if you're the only one left in the building, or the world. I looked up again at the list of rules. They were still unread. My hand lifted, ready to scan the lines, but something inside me hesitated. The words seemed to wait, patient and heavy, as if they would mean more once the building had tested me. I lowered my hand, sat down, and stared at the screens. The night stretched ahead like a corridor with no end. I had done this kind of work before. Empty buildings, silent halls, the hum of electricity filling the gaps. But already I could feel this place pressing against me in ways the others never had. The air seemed to lean closer, listening. My skin prickled, not from cold alone, but from the sense of being measured. The museum was not resting in darkness. It was aware, patient, and intent. It was not sleeping. It was watching, and I could feel its gaze settle over me with every breath I took. The second patrol came and went. I traced the same path through the galleries, my light sliding across glass and stone. In one hall, I thought I heard footsteps behind me, soft and unhurried. I turned quickly. Nothing, only the long carpet and the rows of silent cases. I held the flashlight steady, telling myself it was the echo of my stride, nothing more. But when I moved again, I could have sworn the sound followed. I returned to the office quicker than before, breathing harder. The monitors greeted me with the same grainy calm. For a moment I thought about calling Ellis, but the phone on the desk was old and heavy, and I imagined his voice cold with disapproval. New hires weren't supposed to panic, they were supposed to endure. By midnight, the museum had grown colder. I rubbed my hands together, but the chill did not lift. I took a sip of water from my bottle. It tasted faintly metallic. I set it down and did not drink again. Another patrol, another walk through corridors that felt longer than they had before. The paintings on the walls seemed to watch as I passed. One canvas showed a procession of figures in hoods, painted with such detail I could see the folds of their garments. Their eyes were shadows beneath the hoods, but from the corner of my vision, I thought I saw one turn toward me. I did not look back. At 1:30, I paused in the central gallery. A massive skeleton stood there, ribs arching like the beams of a ship, skull broad and sharp. My light traced its spine, the curve of its claws. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. It looked ready to move. I hurried past. When I reached the office again, my shirt clung to my back. The clock read 2. I sat, wiped my forehead, and stared once more at the rules. Still waiting. Still unread. I felt them pulling at me, promising both answers and warnings. My hand hovered, but again I stopped. Not yet. The museum wanted me to wait. The clock in the security office read 2:15 when I noticed it. On the West Wing monitor, a tall wooden case that had held a carved mask was empty. The bulb above it burned a weak yellow circle. The brass tag beneath the glass still read 47. The list in my pocket had the entry, mask, contained, nothing else. The phone rang, the sudden bell splitting the room like a hammer. I snatched the receiver and forced out my name. "Holt!" Ellis's voice came through, clean and cold. "What did you see?" I swallowed. "Case 47. The mask's gone. Do not search," he said at once. "Do not leave the office until you steady your hands. Write this if you have to. When something is missing, you do not look. You wait for it to return on its own. That is the first rule." "I don't..." I started, but his voice cut over mine. "You don't need to. You obey. Tell me you've read the list." I said nothing, my silence answering for me. He let it hang for a long moment. "Rookie mistake. The building is already watching you. It doesn't forgive ignorance. Read. Remember. I won't call again." Then the line went dead, leaving the dial tone to buzz like an open wound in the air. I stood before the wall sheet titled Rules of Night Watch. The paper looked older than the office itself, its corners curled, its tape yellowed and brittle. The ink shone as though freshly written, a strange wet gleam that didn't belong in the dry air. I stepped closer, close enough to smell dust and something faintly metallic, and began to read. Each line felt heavy, as if the paper resisted giving up its meaning. I made myself go slowly, whispering each rule inside my head. The repetition gave the words a rhythm, hammering them in until they felt less like sentences and more like commands carved into stone. By the third line, my lips moved without sound, my pulse rising with every phrase. By the time I reached the end, the words sat in me like weights, simple, hard, and impossible to forget. If any item is missing from its case, do not search, do not say its name. Cross it off your list and go to the office. Missing things try to be found. If you look, you will be claimed. Reading this, my stomach turned. The memory of the empty mask case made my throat tighten. The rule didn't feel like a theory. It felt like a warning already aimed at me. Any case or door with a red tag stays shut. If one stands open, don't look in. Call, wait. Red tags mean containment failed everywhere else. Curiosity counts as consent. I pictured that sealed red-tagged door in the rotunda and felt my palms dampen. Curiosity had always been a reflex of mine, but here it would be the same as giving myself away. At 2:15 a.m., a chime may sound. Don't follow it. Don't hunt for its source. Cover your ears. Stand still for 60 seconds. The chime reaches bone. Those who answer don't come back to themselves. My ears seemed to ring just from reading it, and I fought the urge to glance around the office as if the sound might already be there. The thought of something striking my bones like an instrument made me clench my jaw until it hurt. If you see another guard, check the uniform. Faded, torn, a style older than yours. Leave. Only one guard works at night. Anyone else is the memory of someone already taken. I imagined looking up and seeing my outline walking the opposite hall, fabric ghosted, eyes hollow. The idea drained the warmth from my chest. My shape could betray me. If a statue is broken, missing a hand, head, or part, leave it. Don't touch fragments. The statues seek completion and may use you to get it. I thought of stone arms reaching for me, of being shaped into someone else's missing piece. My knuckles tightened around the flashlight at my hip, the only thing that felt solid. If the lights fail, don't touch the generator. Turn on your flashlight and wait 7 minutes. The dark has more owners than you. Let it pass. My heart ticked harder as I read. Waiting in the dark wasn't new to me, but knowing that the dark belonged to others was. 7 minutes sounded long enough for anything to decide I was in its way. At shift's end, if someone you know waits at the exit, don't approach. They are not who you remember. Stay inside until the doors open themselves. My throat ached. The thought of seeing a familiar face, someone I loved, and forcing myself to look away felt crueler than anything else. Yet the line was clear. Walk to them, and I would not walk back. I lowered the sheet. Sweat cooled on my palms. The rules didn't read like suggestions. They felt like traps mapped in plain language. On the monitor, case 47 sat like a mouth without teeth. I crossed item 47 off my pocket list with a slow line and set out for the west wing. The corridor air felt colder up the stairs. A draft slid along the floor like water moving under a door. The case stood alone beneath its bulb. The glass was spotless. The wooden base looked freshly oiled. The brass 47 showed a thin nick across the 7 like a scar in metal. The emptiness had weight. I kept my distance and counted 3 slow breaths. I didn't speak. I turned away. A brush sounded behind me on the carpet. I kept my light on the wall. A thin shadow ran along the baseboard as if fingers pressed from inside the stone. The shadow thinned and vanished. My legs wanted to run. I didn't. I moved with a steady pace toward the mirror at the end of the hall. The mirror's glass was old and cloudy, silver backing speckled like frost. My light slid over it and gave me back a weak reflection. For a heartbeat, a second face rode across mine, paint on wood, eye slits, a fixed smile. Heat surged in my chest. I dropped my gaze and walked. The first rule repeated in my head like an engine. Back in the office, I locked the door and watched the screens until my pulse leveled out. Time moved like a slow liquid. The red second hand crawled. To keep from spiraling, I paired each rule with an image in my mind. The empty case, a red tag over black hinges, a tuning fork pressed to bone, a uniform washed to gray, a marble arm on velvet, a flashlight circle in a well of dark, a familiar face behind glass. At 3, the lights failed. No click, no pop, only a sudden plunge into silence. The monitors bled to black as though their light had been swallowed whole. The tick of the clock grew louder in the emptiness, each second dragging, the hands crawling stubbornly forward. My chest tightened at the stillness. I forced my thumb across the switch, and the flashlight snapped a pale circle onto the desk. The rule demanded 7 minutes, exactly 7, and the number felt endless. I told myself not to move, not to breathe too fast, not to give the dark any reason to notice me. I set the light low so it would not show under the door. I counted seconds on my watch and breathed in a square. 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out, 4 hold. A soft scrape came from the hall, like fabric pulled along stone. A second scrape closer. I kept the beam still. On the 6th minute, a knock came, sharp enough to vibrate through the desk. 1 knuckle, firm. A pause that stretched too long. Then 2 taps, deliberate, spaced like a simple code scratched into the wood of a school desk. The rhythm waited for me to respond, as if I should know the answer but never learned it. My pulse jumped against my throat and I kept counting, jaw tight. My tongue felt swollen, my mouth so dry it burned. Every instinct wanted to call back, to tap once and end the silence, but the rule in my head froze me in place. I pressed my nails into my palm until the skin stung. At the exact mark of 7, the overheads flared once and blinked alive. The gray glow bled back across the monitors before settling into color. The hum of the building crawled into the air again, thin but steady. On the hall camera, the space by the door showed nothing at all, bare tile and shadow. My breath slowed, but my hands still shook with cold, as if the knock had reached into the bone and left ice there. On the West Wing feed, A figure turned the far corner and walked toward case 47. The uniform cut matched mine, but the fabric had a washed-out look, navy thinned by bleach. The shoulder patch was a round style I hadn't seen on staff. The figure glided past the mirror. The glass showed tile, wall, and frame, and no body. Rule 4 sat heavily in my chest. Only one guard works at night. Anyone else is in memory. The figure stopped at the empty case and leaned as if to listen. I reached for the phone and pulled back. The rules didn't include a call for this. They included leaving. I held still. The head lifted. The face had the slack gray look of paper soaked and dried. Pupils seemed painted on the skin. The mouth opened and formed my name without sound. I stood so fast that the chair hit the wall. The figure raised a hand in a slow greeting, then touched one finger to the case glass. The hall lights flickered once. When they steadied, the figure was gone. Fog smeared the mirror and cleared. The case stayed empty. I wrote a note on the pad by the phone. 3:07 power out 7 minutes. Knocking at the door. West Wing, obsolete uniform. Mouth shaped my name. Touched case 47. I did not write the word mask. Names had weight here. I didn't want to leave the office. Sitting would make it worse. I took the flashlight and walked. At the mirror, the center had fogged and dried in the shape of a palm, 5 thin marks fanning from it. I didn't match it. In this case, the nick on the brass 7 had been polished out. The wood base looked darker, as if oiled. In the velvet on the back panel, a shallow oval pressed outward where a face might rest. I moved on to the stone gallery. Marble figures lined the walls, shoulder to shoulder. Men, women, a child with a bird, a hero wrapped in a serpent. On the floor lay a marble hand with a square-cut ring carved on its finger. It hadn't been there earlier. A crack ran across the wrist. The ring finger on the headless torso above already wore a ring, a different style. The floor hand belonged elsewhere. The rule about fragments thrummed in me. I left it. The corridor funneled into a rotunda where 4 doors met. Tags hung above the lintels, 3 green, 1 red. The red one had no plaque. The key slot beside it wore a strip of tape with no access during night watch written by hand. The letters had bled at one corner, as if someone had tried to wipe them away and failed. The air changed near that door, a faint shifting, like the first movement of an elevator car. My shoulder blades tightened. I kept my eyes on the floor and passed through. The East Hall held photographs, field tents, notebooks, a dog squinting at snow, a boy standing on a crate. Some plaques hung crooked. I straightened one without thinking, then pulled my hand back. Touching anything here felt like putting your name on a list. I finished the loop and closed the office door quietly. The clock read 4:15. I found a small spiral notebook in the drawer. On the first page, in a hand that wasn't mine. If you make it to 4, you can make it to 6. Keep moving. Signed with a single initial, E. I wrote down the outage, the knock, the figure, the fogged palm, the hand in the stone room, the pressure at the red tag door, and slid the sheet under the blotter. Halfway through the next patrol, a single, clean chime rolled through the air. The tone felt close, as if struck 2 rooms away. I checked the wall clock, 4:42. The rule said 2:15. This wasn't that, but I still stood very still. I didn't chase sound. It faded slowly and left a hollow ache in the chest. Around 5, the West Wing monitor brightened. The bulb above case 47 glowed a fraction stronger. Something crossed the lower frame like a crouched figure moving past. When the image steadied, a strip of cloth lay on the case floor, a slender tie, the sort that would fasten a mask to a head. It hadn't been there before. The tie didn't belong to an empty case. Dawn leaked under the front doors, a thin gray that made edges clearer. My last round began at 5:30. The stone gallery floor had shifted a degree. The ring pointed at the red tag door now. The torso above waited without eyes. I kept walking. Case 47 held a shape under the bulb. The mask lay on velvet, facing the door. The colors looked richer, the wood smoother, the cheek lines deeper. The brass tag was clean, the nick never returned. A faint smear traced the glass at mouth height, as if a breath had fogged and dried there. I didn't lean in. I didn't wipe it away. The rotunda's red tag door stood quiet. The air didn't tug at my sleeves now. The green tags didn't sway. A hair stuck to my forehead. I brushed it back and felt the sweat cooling along my scalp. At 5:58, the lobby camera showed a woman outside the front doors, still as a statue in the early gray. Hands in her coat pockets. Head slightly tilted. Even with the blur of the feed, I recognized the angle of her chin. My sister. The last rule rang clear. If someone you know waits at the exit, do not approach. The muscles along my back tightened until they ached. She shifted her weight the way she always did when she waited for me to finish a shift at an old job. She lifted a hand as if to wave. She didn't. She pressed her palm to the glass. The camera caught 5 pale ovals where her fingers rested. I did not move. The clock took its last slow minute. A sound like wind moved under the lobby door, though nothing opened. Her face sank into the shadow of the overhang. For a breath, I thought I saw a second smile cross her features, thin and painted where no mouth should be. 6 o'clock arrived with a heavy internal clank. Metal found metal. The doors unlocked by themselves. Light washed the steps outside. The space beyond the glass emptied between one blink and the next. I stepped into the hall. The air no longer pressed at the edges. The hum of the lights found a steady pitch. I passed the mirror without looking. In the stone room, the marble hand had become part of the museum's patience again, a fragment that would wait for night to turn its face back to it. At the lobby desk, the woman sat straight, her silver watch ticking a small, strict rhythm. She slid a ledger to me. Sign out. Note anything unusual. I wrote the time. I listed power failure 7 minutes, knocking, West Wing figure in obsolete uniform, case 47 empty, then restored, figure at door resembling family. I stopped there. She flipped the page and filed it with the others. Morning hit my face like clean water when I stepped outside. Cars hissed across wet streets. A cart rattled along the sidewalk. A pigeon beat for a wire and found it. I stood until the cold emptied the leftover tremor from my hands. Behind me, the building held its breath the way it had at 10, then let it out slowly. The rules stayed on the wall in the office, dark ink, curled edges. The list in my pocket had a line through 47. On the walk to my car, I repeated the 7 rules under my breath until they fit the rhythm of my steps. Each rule carried a picture. Each picture carried a task. By the time I reached the corner, the words felt like a tool in my pocket rather than a weight on my throat. The museum had tested me. The rules had held. The night had not been safe, but it had given me a way through. That was enough of a final answer for now. The third night began with a weight already pressing against my chest. The walk from the car felt longer, the streets quieter, the museum darker than memory. I rubbed the bridge of my nose before unlocking the staff entrance. The air that met me inside was heavier than the night outside, like I had stepped underwater. My body carried a hangover of exhaustion, though I hadn't touched a drop. Every muscle burned with the strain of 2 nights of watch, and the lack of sleep gnawed at the back of my eyes. The security office smelled the same. Dust, stale coffee, dry air. But when I glanced at the sheet on the wall, the rules that had already carved themselves into me, the lines blurred. My eyes refused to focus. I blinked, squinted, leaned close, but the ink shimmered like heat waves rising off asphalt. The words resisted me. My pulse quickened. I remembered them all, of course, but memory alone felt weak. What if I misremembered? What if exhaustion scrambled the order? I clenched the desk edge, trying to calm myself, but the idea had already lodged. If my memory faltered, the rules might as well not exist. I sank into the chair and stared at the monitors. For a while, only the hum of the building filled the air. Then I noticed the change. 3 cases were empty. Not 1, 3. In the west wing, a ceremonial dagger lay missing, its velvet cushion bare. In the east gallery, a photograph frame stood empty, the glass revealing nothing but the pale wall behind it. In the stone hall, a marble fragment of a bird had vanished from its stand. My throat dried. The first rule rang in my mind. If any item is missing from its case, do not search, do not say its name. But 3 at once? My hands itched. The urge to confirm, to make sure they hadn't been mislabeled, pushed me out of the chair. I told myself I was only checking the feeds. I said to myself that walking to the wing wasn't the same as searching. Still, when I left the office, my boots on the stone floor sounded too much like betrayal. The west wing greeted me with stillness. The dagger's case gleamed under its bulb, glass polished, velvet cushion perfectly undisturbed, except for one thing. In the center of the cushion, pressed deep as if by a fingertip, was a stain dark and ruddy. My heart lurched. It looked like blood, dry but recent, and the case glass itself bore the faint outline of a handprint smeared along the inside, each finger traced in a deeper shade. I leaned forward despite myself. The fingertips formed a shape too familiar, my own. I staggered back, bile stinging my throat. My hand shook when I raised the flashlight and compared it. The size, the spread, even the curve of the thumb matched perfectly. I whispered my own name before I could stop myself, then bit it back and pressed a fist to my lips. The rule had warned against naming what was missing. The air thickened as if the walls had heard. I forced my legs to move, every step toward the east gallery feeling like a rope tightening around my chest. The empty frame hung crooked, and at first I thought that was all. But when I lifted the beam closer, I saw scratches in the glass. The scratches were letters, not random marks or cracks, etched as though by a desperate nail. My name, again. Carved twice, overlapping, the letters warped and clawed. My stomach dropped so fast it felt like falling. The rules had not lied. Missing things tried to be found, and they had found me. The chime came early. Not 2:15, not even close. It was 1:47 when the sound struck. One clear note rolled through the east gallery, resonant and low, vibrating in my chest. My knees nearly buckled. I grabbed the frame to steady myself, but the glass burned hot under my palm. The sound lengthened into a tone that shook the teeth in my jaw. I should have covered my ears, should have frozen, but instinct betrayed me. I turned into the corridor, trying to follow the echo. The walls trembled. The stone beneath my hand pulsed with heat, as if veins ran through it. My ears rang sharply, a needle of pain drilling deeper. I pressed forward 1 step, 2. The sound thickened, became a pressure that drove into my skull. My left ear popped with a wet crack, and warmth trickled down my jawline. My vision blurred. I froze then, terror anchoring me, realizing too late what I had done. I had gone after the chime. The rule had warned, the chime reaches bone. The vibration drilled through marrow, rattling my ribs and spine until every joint felt ready to crack. My skull buzzed like a jar of wasps, teeth clattering in their sockets. I clamped both palms over my ears, nails digging into my scalp, squeezed my eyes shut, and forced myself to count. At 40, my balance went, knees buckling, stomach twisting as if gravity had been yanked sideways. By 60, the external sound had gone, but the echo inside me screamed on. When I pulled my hand away, my fingertips were slick with blood from my ear and the skin around it raw and tender. Back in the west corridor, the monitors in my head replayed Ellis's voice. Only one guard works at night. My chest tightened, every step echoing like a countdown. I prayed not to see what I feared. But when I turned the corner near Case 47, he was there, a figure in a guard's uniform, the same cut as mine, yet not right at all. The fabric looked bleached and brittle, as if it had been buried and dug up. The patch on his shoulder bore symbols I didn't recognize, faded into threads that barely clung. His boots dragged rather than stepped, each movement deliberate, like a puppet learning to walk. His posture sagged forward, arms hanging loose but tense, and his head tilted sideways at an angle too sharp to be natural, like a doll's neck twisted until the joint cracked. He stood before the mirror but gave no reflection, only the blank glass swallowing his shape. I should have turned. I should have walked. Instead, I froze, staring, waiting to see what would happen if I didn't obey. My muscles locked, the air caught in my throat. The figure raised its head and slowly, deliberately, the features shifted. Cheeks sank inward as if flesh collapsed against bone. The brow tightened into a shape I recognized from the mirror each morning. The mouth reshaped into my own weary lines. In seconds, I was staring at myself, but without the spark of awareness behind the eyes. Pale skin drained of color, tired eyes hollowed into shadows, my own jawline set like stone. My reflection existed outside the mirror, breathing where it should not. The sight drove the breath from my lungs. The figure's lips moved, each syllable clear though no sound left them. My name. Again and again. My name. I read it forming over and over until my ears rang with the echo of a voice that wasn't there. The face trembled, the eyes sagged and blurred, and then blackness poured across them as though ink had been spilled straight into the sockets. My stomach twisted, bile rising, vision tilting. For 2 beats of my heart, I felt torn loose from my body, as if invisible fingers tugged me from my own skin, leaving a hollow for something else to fill. Then, with a flicker of the overhead lights, the figure was gone. My knees buckled and I crashed against the wall, forehead slick with sweat, spine shivering with cold fear. The stone gallery loomed larger with each step. My boots echoed against marble, the sound bouncing back as if the hall itself mocked my presence. Statues stood in rigid ranks, their carved eyes catching stray light so they seemed to watch me pass. I had walked this hall before, yet tonight the air clung colder, pressing tight against my chest. Halfway down, a sharp crack split the silence. I whipped my head around just in time to see a marble hand snap from a statue's wrist and roll across the floor, the fingers clicking like dice until it skittered against the base of a pedestal. I flinched hard, heart hammering, then bent without thinking. The sound of my breath rasped inside my skull as I reached for it. When my fingers closed around the piece, the chill shocked me. The weight was heavy, dense, undeniably real. For an instant, relief rushed through me, absurd but strong. Here was something solid, something I could hold and control in a place where everything else defied sense. Then the change began. My fingers stiffened, skin blanching, texture roughening beneath my eyes. Gray spread along my knuckles like frostbite. I gasped, dropped the fragment, but the stone had already claimed me. My fingertips clung to marble hardness, nails fused with fine cracks. Panic surged. I yanked my hand against my shirt, rubbed, scratched. Finally, as if loosening from a grip, the stone withdrew. My fingers returned to flesh, though stiff and aching, the cuticles ringed in stubborn gray. I stared at them in horror. The rule had warned. The statues seek completion. They had tried to complete themselves with me. The rotunda stretched wide, its doors waiting. 3 bore green tags, but the 4th, red, pulsed faintly in the dark. Not light, not sound, but something in the air. The brass knob trembled, rattling softly, as if a hand on the other side tested the lock. My throat locked tight. The rules told me to stay away, to call, to wait. But the pull was stronger tonight, like a voice just beyond hearing. I edged close despite the warning bells in my skull. My fingertips hovered inches from the knob. That was when I heard it. A child's voice, muffled but clear. A whisper, syllables I couldn't shape. I bent nearer. The sound crawled under my skin, stirring the muscles in my arm. Every hair along my body rose. My palm tingled as though hundreds of tiny feet scurried beneath the surface. The urge to grab the handle nearly overpowered me. I had to wrench my arm back, shaking it until the sensation passed, leaving only the cold ache of what might have been. I fled from the rotunda, lungs burning as if fire spread through my chest, sweat soaking my shirt until the fabric clung to my back. I slammed the office door shut hard enough to rattle the glass in its frame, but the echo only deepened the silence. The stale air inside did nothing to calm me. It felt trapped, recycled, tainted. I pressed my gray-marked fingertips against the desk, the wood cool but unsteady beneath trembling hands, and tried to ground myself in the ordinary hum of the fluorescent lights above. The buzz was uneven, flickering in rhythm with my pulse, making the ceiling feel closer with every second. My breaths came ragged, shallow, and each attempt to steady them only reminded me how far I was from steady. The rules, once absolute, no longer held their weight. They bent, they cracked, and each fracture had already reached inside me, leaving marks I could not shake. The rest of the night unfolded in fragments. Monitors flickered images that came and went too fast to trust. The mask in case 47 tilting on its own, the photograph frame filling with a blurred face pressed close to the glass, the marble bird fragment reappearing on its cushion but trembling like a living thing. I stopped writing notes. Words felt like bait now. At 5, silence fell across every feed. The monitors that had been alive with shifting shadows froze mid-frame. No hum of static, no flicker of light, no motion. Only stillness, so complete it felt as though the building itself held its breath, waiting. My eyes burned from staring, and when I finally stood, my legs shook as I paced the office, whispering the rules under my breath. The words came softer than before, as if they no longer believed themselves. Each syllable tasted thin and fragile in my mouth. When the first faint blush of dawn touched the lobby doors, the sight wrenched a sob from my throat. Relief, raw and desperate, flooded me. But the relief crumbled almost instantly. As the locks clicked open at 6, I felt a wetness slide down my neck. My fingers came away streaked red from a thin line of blood trailing from my ear. I caught my reflection in the lobby glass, my face gaunt, skin drained, my frame thinner than memory, my eyes ringed dark. Worse were my hands. The skin of my fingertips bore the gray stain of stone, darker now, spreading in uneven patches where the fragment had kissed me. The rules had been broken, even by mere steps and seconds, and they had carved themselves into me as proof. When I stepped outside, the morning light cut against me with the sharpness of a blade. It exposed rather than saved. The sun illuminated everything I wanted hidden, the blood drying at my collar, the trembling in my hands, the sickly pallor on my skin. Each step on the street dragged heavier than the last. For the first time since the job began, my fear no longer belonged to the night alone, but to the parts of it that had clung to me, carried forward, and now walked beside me in the day. The fourth night began heavier than the others. My body ached in places I didn't know could ache, and when I caught my reflection in the glass of the lobby doors, I barely recognized myself. The skin under my eyes sagged, bruised dark. My fingertips, once only faintly gray, were now mottled with stone-colored blotches that didn't wash away no matter how hard I scrubbed. The morning had not restored me this time. Instead, it seemed to strip me thinner, leaving nerves raw and muscles trembling. The weight of the building pressed against me before I had even stepped inside. As the locks clicked behind me, the silence roared. Each hallway exhaled a stale chill that carried memories of the nights before. The mirror that reflected what shouldn't. The statues that tried to graft themselves onto me. The chime that had bled through bone. The rules were meant to contain all this, to shield me, but I felt their grip loosening. I was obeying them, line by line, and still the museum gnawed at me. The thought wormed deeper each time I glanced at the rule sheet in the office. Maybe the rules weren't protection, maybe they were chains. Maybe the real answer waited somewhere else in the building. I sat before the monitors, but my eyes refused to settle on the usual feeds. Instead, they searched the corners, the places the cameras always glitched. And there it was again. The same distortion I had noticed the night before. A patch of static that flickered in the far end of the west corridor, near the storage wing. Every few minutes, like clockwork, the cameras there went black for 3 seconds before snapping back. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. My chest tightened as I leaned close, watching, counting the intervals. Something was down there, something that didn't want to be seen. Ellis's voice returned unbidden, a scrap of conversation from my first night. "This building wasn't always a museum," he had said, brushing it off when I pressed him. "It's older. Some things don't go away just because you hang a plaque over them." At the time, I thought it was just superstition, an old man making the place sound dramatic. Now, it felt like a warning he hadn't finished. I told myself to stay in the chair, to keep my eyes on the monitors, and let the hours bleed away until morning. Yet the silence pressed harder and harder, like it had shape and weight, sinking teeth into my resolve. My chest tightened with each second until the pressure drove me to my feet. My boots dragged across the floor, every scrape loud in the empty halls, every step carrying the feeling that I was crossing a line I would not be able to step back from. The rules had never mentioned the door at the end of the west corridor, but instinct told me what words on a page had not. It was a door built to be left closed, and I felt that truth in my bones as clearly as my own name. The lock was rusted, the handle tarnished with green corrosion. When I pressed my ear against the wood, a faint draft breathed through the seam, damp and cold. It smelled of earth, not dust like the museum above. I pressed harder, and a distant sound met me. Dripping water, slow and rhythmic. My hand shook on the knob. For a long moment I almost turned back, told myself I'd imagined it. But then the draft thickened, carrying something beneath the scent of stone. Something old and metallic, like iron left to rust in the rain. Blood, or the memory of it. The knob groaned when it turned. The door yielded an inch, then 2, as if it had been waiting for someone to finally insist. A puff of stale, wet air rushed over me, carrying grit that stung my eyes. I lifted the flashlight, its beam trembling across stone steps that spiraled downward. The walls were rough-hewn, not the polished marble of the museum above, but raw, chiseled rock still bearing the scars of tools. This was not built for visitors. This was older, carved for function or for secrecy. The descent was slow, each step coated in damp film. My boots slipped twice, catching myself against the wall. The stone there was slick, beaded with condensation. The air thickened the deeper I went, pressing into my lungs with damp weight. The smell grew sharper, rot and rust intertwined, and I thought of wounds that never closed. My flashlight flickered, the beam thinning as if the dark itself resisted illumination. At the bottom of the stairs, the passage widened into a chamber. The air was colder here, breath visible in pale streams. My beam skated across the walls, revealing faded markings etched deep into the stone. Symbols I couldn't read stretched across the walls, circles intersected with jagged lines like crude constellations carved by an unsteady hand. Words in scripts I didn't recognize sprawled alongside them, their edges eaten by time but still sharp enough to sting the eyes. Some of the markings glowed faintly as the light passed, not with warmth, but with a sickly, ember-like pulse that seemed to breathe. My flashlight swept lower, across a floor broken and treacherous, scattered with splinters of wood that crunched underfoot and scraps of cloth stiff as stone, their outlines still shaped vaguely like the bodies they had once wrapped. The air was heavier here, laden with the musk of rot and long-dried blood. It could have been a vault, a place meant to seal something away, or a burial place where the dead refused to stay quiet. Both images clashed in my head, neither giving me comfort, each feeding the dread that tightened in my chest. Against one wall stood shelves, crude and ancient, their wood blackened with damp and age. Upon them lay objects that had no tags, no plaques, no explanations, as though the museum above had disowned them. A mask rested crookedly, cracked down the center, its edges rimmed with dried matter darker than paint, the inside lined with hair that clung like cobwebs. Beside it hung a row of teeth strung tightly on wire, yellowed, uneven, and too human in shape to mistake for anything else. A glass jar stood cloudy with murk, and within it something pale floated, pressed against the glass like it wanted to be seen but had no face to show. Other fragments crowded the shelves, shards of bone carved with lines, rusted locks that no key could open, scraps of fabric hardened with stains. None of these were museum pieces. They were remnants dragged from the earth, things meant to stay buried, hidden from any catalog or display. I forced myself to keep moving, though each object I passed seemed to lean toward me, eager to be acknowledged. Then I saw the papers, a stack of them, warped with age and damp, bound in leather straps. My hand shook as I reached out. The cover bore no title, but when I pulled the strap loose, pages fanned apart. The writing inside was jagged, ink bled into the fibers. Names filled the first page, dozens of them, each crossed through with thick lines. The last name stopped me cold. It was Ellis. His name, written and then struck through. My stomach twisted. He had known. He had been marked. He had survived, somehow. Or maybe he hadn't. Further in, the pages listed the rules. Not the rules on the wall upstairs, but older, harsher. Some I recognized written in different words, stricter. Others I had never seen. Do not descend below the rotunda. Do not carry the dead above ground. Do not speak the names of the unfinished. My skin prickled with each line. These weren't rules for guards. There were rules for something else, something that lived down here before the museum was ever built. The chamber darkened. My flashlight dimmed, battery draining too fast. The walls seemed to close in, the markings glowing faintly on their own. From the far side of the chamber came sound, soft, wet, deliberate. Footsteps on stone. I froze, clutching the book to my chest. The air chilled further, the damp draft shifting direction as if something vast had moved. A shadow broke from the dark, long-limbed, featureless, bending where joints should not. Its gait was slow, patient, but each step scraped like stone grinding stone. It did not hurry. It didn't need to. My heart slammed against my ribs. I stumbled backward, pages slipping in my grip. The book sagged open, a page tearing under my thumb. The sound made the figure pause, its head, or what passed for one, tilted, listening. The silence that followed pressed tighter than any chime, crushing in on me. I knew then the rules upstairs had only ever been fragments of a larger warning, and I had walked willingly into the rest. The figure moved again, closer, steady. Its outline stretched unnaturally in the dim glow, each movement scraping across stone like claws on slate. My breath caught, and instinct finally ripped me free. I bolted for the stairs. The chamber collapsed in shadow behind me, the shelves rattling as though unseen hands shook them. My flashlight sputtered, strobing flashes across the chaos, the jar bursting on the ground in a spray of cloudy liquid, the mask tumbling from its perch with a hollow crack, the carved markings on the walls flaring so bright they seared into my vision like firebrands. My boots slipped on the slick stone, legs nearly giving way as panic drove me upward. My palms dragged raw against the wet wall, leaving streaks of skin and blood as I clawed for height. Each step felt slower, the weight of something vast crawling up behind me, its presence pushing the air tight around my throat. The climb felt endless, the stairwell tilting and swaying as if it too tried to hold me back. Still, I forced myself upward, lungs burning, ribs aching. When I finally slammed the door shut at the top, my chest nearly burst with the violence of my breath. My whole body shook, arms trembling so hard I fumbled the lock twice before sliding it into place. The wood shuddered once, as though something heavy pressed from the other side, then stilled. Silence returned, but silence was no comfort anymore. It pressed against my ears until I could hear my pulse roaring. I pressed my back to the door, the stolen book crushed tight in my grip, its pages damp from my sweat. The rules had multiplied, deepened, revealed their roots, and with every ragged breath, I felt their weight settle over me. The museum was not a cage for history. It was a lid, and something beneath it had stirred, hungry for release. The book never left my hands. Even when I stumbled back into the guard's office, lungs shredded from running, the cracked leather binding stuck to my palms as if fused. I dropped into the chair, every muscle shaking, and pulled the lamp close to the pages. What I saw was not comfort. The ink bled and scrawled across the parchment in jagged strokes, each word pressed into the fibers as though written with a hand trembling on the edge of madness. The first section was names. Dozens. More than the number of guards this place could ever have legally hired. They stretched back decades, centuries maybe, each name neatly written, each one crossed through with heavy black lines. My eyes snagged again and again on that last entry. Ellis. The ink was fresher than the others, though still warped with damp. His name struck through, but next to it, in smaller script, still walking. My skin crawled so fiercely it felt like ants burrowed beneath it. I had seen him, spoken to him, even felt the pressure of his handshake. The memory of that first night replayed in sharp flashes, the tired smile, the way his eyes lingered on mine, the warmth of his palm against my own. If his name had already been struck from the book, what exactly had greeted me at the door? What sort of remnant had smiled? What echo of Ellis had reached out to me? The thought twisted in my gut, leaving me unsure if I had ever truly met a living man at all. The next pages grew worse. They listed rules, yes, but not the printed sheet taped to the office wall. These were harsher, older. They repeated some commands in sterner terms. Do not carry the dead above ground. Do not descend below the rotunda. Others were new. Do not bleed into the stone. Do not listen when they call your name. Each one felt like a blade sliding between my ribs. These weren't warnings for workers. These were instructions for survival in a place that had been swallowing men alive for longer than the World Museum existed. My lamp flickered once, then again, the bulb buzzing faintly before it gave out altogether. The office drowned in black so suddenly it felt like someone had pressed their hands over my eyes. I jolted to my feet, heart hammering against my ribs. The monitors snapped off with sharp clicks, each screen collapsing into emptiness, and the hum of the overhead lights cut out, leaving only a silence that pressed into my ears. Even the thin emergency strips along the floor, meant never to fail, remained dark, their glow extinguished as if swallowed. My breath rasped as I fumbled for my flashlight, the plastic cold and slick in my grip, and thumbed it on. The weak beam quivered, barely cutting 3 feet into the dense dark, as though the air had thickened into smoke. I staggered to the door and twisted the handle, locked tight, metal biting back against my pull. I yanked the phone from the desk cradle, pressing the receiver to my ear. Nothing, no static, no dial tone, just silence. Every system, every safeguard, gone in a single sweep. Then the first sound broke the quiet. A groan of metal rose from deep within the halls, long and aching, like hinges that had not moved in centuries straining against rust. The sound rolled through the floor and up my legs, followed by a crash that shook the desk. Then another, sharper, closer. After that came the thud of something immense dragging across stone, steady and deliberate, as if the weight of a boulder was being hauled inch by inch through the corridors. My light jittered across the office wall. and in its reflection I saw it. Movement on the darkened feeds that should have been lifeless. The monitors, though powered down, shimmered faintly with ghostly outlines. Shapes slid across the black glass. Not shadows, but the figures of exhibits. Figures that should have been locked in eternal stillness. I forced the door open and stepped into a corridor that vibrated as though a giant drum beat beneath it. The air trembled. Every glass case rattled in its frame, metal locks buzzing against their catches. At the far end, a sculpture began to shift. Granite shoulders ground together with a sickening scrape, sending dust cascading down its pedestal like sand through an hourglass. The chin of the figure, once lifted in noble pride, groaned downward. Inch by inch it turned, deliberate, purposeful, until the stone eyes met mine. A weight pressed against my chest, urging me to freeze. I bolted, legs screaming as I hurled myself down the corridor. The museum was no longer a museum. Each gallery became a nightmare unto itself. In the fossil hall, the towering skeleton of a prehistoric beast bent at its spine, skull creaking as it followed me, teeth long dead but clashing together in mock hunger. In the medieval gallery, swords leapt from mounts, steel clattering across marble, dragging themselves an inch at a time like predators crawling. Paintings shivered in their frames, the faces within twisting, mouths stretching too wide, eyes rolling to follow me as I stumbled past. The rules echoed in my mind, each one a chain, each one breaking in succession. Do not let the exhibits move on their own. Too late. Do not let them touch you. A blade whistled past my shoulder, clipping cloth. Do not turn from the monitors. There were no monitors left to turn to. Somewhere below, something vast climbed. I felt it in the tremor of the floor, in the cracks spiderwebbing the walls, in the stale gusts of breath that carried upward through vents and seams. The thing I had seen in the chamber no longer stayed there. It was rising. I tripped into the grand rotunda, breath tearing, flashlight beams swinging wild across pillars and staircases. And there he was, Ellis, or what remained of him. His frame slouched against the central plinth, hands dangling too long, skin gray and cracked like drying clay. His eyes glowed faintly, not alive, but not yet gone. When he lifted his head, I recognized the same man who had welcomed me, who had smiled tiredly on my first night. Yet his jaw clicked when it moved, as though stone and bone warred for control. "You saw my name," he rasped. The words crawled out of him, thick and broken. Crossed out, but still walking. I could not answer. My throat had sealed shut. I clutched the book tighter, the edges cutting into my palms. "This place keeps us," he went on. "It doesn't let go. The rules, they aren't to keep it out. They're to keep us in." A crash shook the floor. Statues toppled from their pedestals. One burst on impact, stone fragments skittering like bones across the marble. The air howled as though sucked from every corridor. Ellis leaned closer, his cracked lips splitting in something almost like pity. "It wants a guard. Always. Someone to carry the rules. I carried them too long. I can't anymore." His chest rattled as he reached for me, fingers curling like roots. "It's your turn." The book pulsed in my grip, warm now, almost alive. Pages fluttered, though no wind touched them. Each rule glowed faintly, burning itself into my vision. Outside the rotunda, footsteps scraped, claws dragged, exhibits shuddered and shrieked. The museum convulsed as the thing beneath pushed harder at its lid. Ellis shoved the book toward me. His hands shook, veins dark with stone. "Take it, or it takes you." I wanted to scream, to deny him, but the words curdled in my throat. The choice loomed over me, heavier than the building itself. Behind Ellis, the grand doors of the museum shuddered on their hinges, daylight bleeding faintly through the crack. Morning was near. Freedom, maybe. But the rules, the chain, the endless cycle. If I stepped out, would the museum let me? Would it let me walk away? Or would it drag me back as it had Ellis? The footsteps drew closer. Statues wept dust as they lurched into the rotunda. The skeleton roared with the rattle of dry bones. The shadow from below stretched long across the marble, swallowing the last strips of light. Ellis's hand closed around mine, cold and crumbling. He forced the book upward between us. Choose. The pages flared white. My vision drowned in it. My heart stopped, started, then beat in time with something older than me, older than the city above. The weight of every name, every crossed-out line, bore down on me. And in that blinding moment, I understood. This museum was not built to preserve the past. It was built to hold it down. Whether I accepted the book or not, whether I became the next keeper of its rules or died beneath them, the lid was already cracking. The last thing I heard was Ellis whispering, half stone, half man, still walking. Then the world went dark.